sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on Zolized Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Only on Zolized Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
Welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. Well, not back, but thank you for joining me again on Pleasure Pulse. My name is Roma Richardson, and I'm your host this evening, and I'm joined by two of my return guests here, whom I'll introduce or reintroduce to you shortly. This evening is a continuation of our conversation last week. When we were talking about sexual violence. As I mentioned, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So this month, our conversations are focusing on that topic. And we're focusing on sexual assault and sexual violence that occurs against the range of human beings that exist in St. Kitts Nevis. So I will, as usual, give you some time to gather the troops to let everybody know that Pleasure Pulse is on ZIZ. We're on YouTube, on Facebook, I think, and on radio, as usual. So, as usual, a short break, and then we'll come right back and start the show. Welcome back. We're getting caught off guard a bit with the returns here, but welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. You're tuned in to ZIZ, and this week we're continuing our conversation on sexual violence. I have in studio with me two of my guests from last week, whom I'll just ask to reintroduce themselves so that those who maybe didn't get to join us last week can know who you are.
Hi, good evening. My name is Troy Watson. I work with Probation and Child Protection Services. And it's a pleasure to be here again.
Welcome back.
And I am Tranaya Douglas, and I am a gender officer in the Department of Gender Affairs.
Welcome back too, and thank you for joining me again. Last week we talked broadly about the impact of sexual violence, and we discussed things like mandatory reporting, the effects of violence that folks have seen in their different workspaces and work environments, and those effects ranging from on the individual to on the communities themselves. We talked about some of the things or some of the issues that come up with cases around sexual violence, things like the commercial or capitalist or exploitative, financially exploitative side of it. We talked about support that exists for survivors. And this week, because as usual, every time I have a conversation, after the show ends, we keep talking, and we realize, that there was so much that we never got to. And so I thought that it was really important for us to continue this conversation while I have everyone here and focused on this topic. So we're going to continue the conversation looking at some of the things that we never got to touch on, and especially, we talk a lot about women and girls as survivors of sexual violence, and we talk a lot about it because they are disproportionately affected by certain types of violence, including sexual violence, but it doesn't mean that boys and men are also not experiencing or victims of sexual violence and sexual assault. So we're also going to get into that. We're going to get into some conversations around gender sensitization and the importance of that, and we'll also explain what that is when we get to it. And we'll share some final words when we get to the end of the show. So, before the show started, we were actually having a little conversation on statistics because I don't know if I'm a nerd, but like depending on where you sit, depending on the kind of work that you do, statistics are very important to access because you need data for a lot of things, right? Sometimes you need data to make an argument for why a certain thing needs to happen or needs to stop happening. And in our case, I think some people still, there's maybe like some dissonance, some denial of the sexual violence that occurs in our small societies. I mean, last week you mentioned that there are essentially some incest communities or incest villages. So that's villages where everybody is related to everybody else. And post the show, I was talking about this with someone and they were able to like name communities and name places where everybody got the same.
We shall not do that.
We won't name communities, but I'm sure, St. Kitts being a small place, we kind of
right.
Are aware of what happens here. So I won't ask you for the statistics because I know that you're unable to share them now, but I want, I guess, to understand what are some of the issues that you experience with getting some of these numbers, and just give me the context for the statistics that we have or don't have.
Well, in terms of programming, projects and things that we do to execute our jobs, we need data, and the data is there. The challenges we're having with data is how cases are classified in the first place, because a matter may be reported to the department as being under this category, but after the investigation you realize that it falls not only there, but it falls under something else. And sometimes it is, in a sense, wrongly placed because somebody who calls in to make a report on an issue may start reporting something like a neglect matter. And when you get to the family, you try to understand the underlying issues, you realize there are a lot of other things happening there. In our context, it becomes difficult because it may come in under this, and we need to make transition to that. The same is true as it relates to sexual violence, in that many of our cases, whether it is in the child protection unit or within gender affairs, are not properly placed. And we have difficulty in terms of identifying truly what this case is supposed to be. Classical example is that a matter might be statutory rape, but the issue just come in and say rape. Now, based on the law, the age of the person, the victim, the survivor, it is not rape. It should be statutory rape. So that will offset the true statistic relating to the number of this category of offenses as opposed to something else. We also have challenges where it may be classified by the police as the offense against a person. The touching of someone, the groping of someone, fondling of someone, it may be offense against the person or in terms of physical contact and not in relation to the sexual abuse or whatever we want to call it. So statistics can be kind of challenging, but the information is there, and we do use the statistics to drive our response to some situations.
Okay.
I don't know what is happening from gender affairs side.
And it's okay.
I've actually never received a report, well, not yet at least, but for the future, I think for me, I'm just working on trying to see where the improvement needs to happen, what trends are there, what's missing, the gaps, especially when it comes to collecting data and also finding the gaps in data gaps as well. So I think it's just me now trying to pick up and see, like I said, what needs to be changed or improved with those.
Yeah.
May I share something else with our listeners? Last week in discussion, I used a definition, and I'd just like to put it out there again since we're addressing this from the children's side of things. And the definition is about child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is any sexual activity between adults and minors or between two minors when one forces it on the other. This includes sexual touching or non-touching acts like exhibitionism, exposure to pornography, photography of a child for sexual gratification, solicitation of a child for prostitution, voyeurism, and communication in a sexual way by phone, internet, or face-to-face. This may also be extended into trafficking of persons for sexual purposes. So I just want listeners to know that we are only trying to address it from, my department is only trying to address it from the sexual abuse directed towards children directly and indirectly.
Okay, thank you again for the definition. That's like a general definition, not from our law.
No,
right?
This is something I took from the Children Assessment Center website.
Okay.
So
because I know, like, part of, and I think you kind of, or at least it made me think about it when you were talking about where things are registered, right? Because there are lots of ways that our law has not caught up to, like, people, the breadth of things that people experience when it comes to sexual violence, sexual harassment. I mean, it was just the other day that we had the Buggery law overturned. So it's like there's just so much that happens that you can't even necessarily find a charge for, or like categorize or file this under something because it just doesn't exist in name here. So I think that's like an important point to note as well. I'm not gonna dwell on the statistics because I know you said, like, you know, there are some sensitivities and some reasons around not being able to share them. But I know, and I was saying that there are lots of like regional, not lots, but a few regional reports out there, maybe from a few years ago, that do have some statistics. So if people are interested, you know, I'd encourage you to go and look for some of those and read them.
By law, you should have access to information, but I'm just saying from my end, based on my level in the food chain or the hierarchy of the, the ministry, it may be best for you to ask that of possibly a director or a permanent secretary. I would not be able to share with you unless I am so authorized.
Got you. Okay. So here's to hoping at some point, you know, statistics become, or some statistics become public and publicly accessible, but that's just a personal and individual hope. All right. So I think even though we don't have statistics, like, we still kind of know for the show. Okay. Even though we don't have the statistics with us right now, we still, I think, all have maybe not a full sense of what's happening, because I know that there are some, like, when I hear the stories, you know, I think there are some things that are happening that probably most of us don't know about. But there are some things that we do know about and some things that we see very clearly. And in our conversation last week, you know, and I appreciate your bringing this in, you know, about the abuse of boys, because that is something that happens that we don't also, like, file properly. And I say file properly because we treat it as if it's okay. Whereas for girls, you know, it's something that we, not all, agree on is wrong. But for example, let's talk about carnival, or let's talk about community festivals. Anywhere you go, street jam, right? There's bound to be a video, or, you know, you standing up on the side of the road and there's a little boy and there's an adult woman who comes to dance on the little boy, right?
Yes. Okay, so sometimes we become, we like to sensationalize things about the fact that, okay, so it looks cute and he's doing it well, so some adults will just go and bend over in front of him and things like that. But there are also situations in which adults take children for their sexual gratification. And when the situation is, it's an adult female and a minor who is a boy, society tends not to hear about it, and sometimes they say, well, he's a little boy, he's taking practice. They're not seeing the harm that they're doing, and they're seeing no harm in it whatsoever. It happens a lot across the world and in the Caribbean, where some depraved mothers would take their young boys and tell them, come and practice, because later on you will need to know how to use your tool and things of the sort. So these things are happening, but they're underreported, and people never usually see it as something wrong.
Mm-hmm. I would say the reason being for that is just the stereotype of hyper masculinization. That's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that people over stereotype what they think it means to be a boy or a male, and they think that it's acceptable, and or they turn a blind eye to it because it's like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do, this is just accepted, so they groom them as they get older to say like this behavior is normal, and they don't grow up thinking or seeing it as something that is wrong because it's what they were socialized to think it was a good thing to do. Whereas for girls, they're hypersexualized, so, and objectified. So it's like you're socialized, brought up by different external factors, whether it be at school, your friends, peers, family members, and they teach you, well, this is the box you're supposed to be in, and this is the box that you're supposed to be in. You're supposed to go after women, you're supposed to accept this. If girls throw themselves after you, like, that's great. For girls, if men, you like, don't let too much men in your life.
Yeah.
So it's like the complete opposite, and it's like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. So it's just a matter of girls being hypersexualized and boys being hypermasculinized.
Well, in a sense, the issue about masculinity and manhood is that they believe that a man is supposed to be tall, dark, handsome. He's supposed to have hairy chest, bow legs, blue eyes, have a big job, and he's supposed to have a big car. He's supposed to have a lot of tools and a big tool. And that is where the over-sexualization comes into play. Now, if the man is supposed to do that, they feel it is okay to train the boy to get to that. So we create all sort of situations in which boys are supposed to be this and boys are supposed to be that. And we have had situations in which we are trying to prove masculinity and manhood in our boys, where if the young man sounds a bit effeminate, he's not homosexual, effeminate, there is this push to force him into being a man. So they're going to introduce all sort of ideas and activities that would so-called toughen him up and put some bass in his voice and put lead in his pencil. So that is the situation that we're talking about with the over-sexualization of our children. And it is rarely frowned upon because culturally it is accepted.
Yeah. Have you seen cases like that in your work with, I guess, male?
We do have a whole lot of cases involving the molestation of males. Now, the molestation may be that which we spoke about as far as the sexual activity. And our boys have been molested by a lot of males.
Yeah.
So that also affects the psyche of our boys later on. And I do know of instances where adult males are still trying to escape the trauma of being molested as boys. And for that reason, you can have it as far as the movement towards saying this is right and this is what we should do. And this is how life is. A man is to be with a man. Or depending on where you are on the other end, where they have a whole lot of women because they're trying to prove that they are not homosexuals.
Yeah.
So.
And well, first of all, I just want to point out, and I feel like I've said this before, that violence is a cycle, right?
Yes.
Not just physical violence that children see on the streets, but also violence that happens in the home, and also sexual violence and things like that. So when you look and when you probably talk to a lot of folks who are adult perpetrators of sexual violence, you might uncover that they were childhood victims of sexual violence too. So like, I just want to put that squarely there in terms of how we like continue to perpetuate these cycles of violence and cycles of accepted grooming and things like that without even recognizing it as grooming. Because and I feel like what I see often in cases like that is, especially with an older woman and a younger boy, and the older woman is introducing the boy to sex or sex-like activities from young, he now goes and does it with girls his age because he thinks it's okay. He has these expectations of girls his age because this is what he's been practicing.
Okay, I got you. This is where I think Troy need to come in, because it's from the gender-based side of things. And for our listeners, those who know me would have known, or they should be aware, that I worked in gender affairs for 9 years prior to going to probation and child protection services. And what we do know is that gender-based violence and domestic violence is cyclical. It is learned behavior. And the objective behind it is to exert power and control over someone else. Now, in it, some people may innocently go into it because that's what they learned.
Yeah.
And they feel that we should just continue down this line. And for that reason, you will find families continuing on in successive generations, and then they might also go outside of the family.
Yeah.
And it will affect the relationships that we have in adulthood, because we believe that this is how it should be. But I don't want to trespass too much in the gender affairs.
That's true now. That's true now.
It's so funny because that's exactly what I was going to talk about.
Okay, talk about it.
I actually have made a few notes about the topic today. So the things that people need to know about, in that people need to understand that boys are just as vulnerable to sexual violence as girls, and that their experiences are also valid and deserving of support and validation. I think it's also crucial to understand that sexual violence, like you said, has long-lasting impacts and effects on boys' mental health and well-being, and to provide, we need to provide appropriate resources and services for those survivors, at least making them feel like it's a safe space to even talk about that. Right. This also happens to boys as well. Like, people think, oh, we're only talking about girls, but we need to have more of a conversation about, and that's why the data is important, because if it's so, we'll be able to see, is it happening more so with boys in the country, or is it with girls? And then you will be able to say, well, no, this actually takes, boys experience this too, you don't have to feel bad about it. But I mean, it's a horrible experience, but at the same time, it's real, and it does happen to boys as well. I think society tries to perpetuate a double standard between girls and boys as to when it comes to stereotypes and what they think that girls, what they know about girls and what they think they know about boys. So what I had here was that girls are often viewed as the victims in cases of sexual abuse. Boys may be dismissed or even praised for their experiences. And it's also essential to note that you need to challenge these harmful stereotypes to hold perpetrators of sexual violence accountable regardless of the gender of the victim.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the challenges, or one of the things I want to point out to the public, is that in as much as we are collecting data or information, we're keeping the statistics, the cases of abuses generally are underreported. So we're just looking at a microcosm of the real situation out there. We also need to look at it from a matter or a point of understanding that the people who perpetuated these things or perpetrate these things are persons who were abused. Okay, to my mind, it's not always the case.
Right.
It is not always the case. Some of our people are they're not socially trained or formed to relate to people. And for that reason, you will find a lot of our men in particular will become predators. They cannot have decent conversations with adults.
Yeah.
They cannot woo a woman, and for that reason they go after our juveniles and minors, because they cannot, in a sense, stay toe-to-toe with the women. And it becomes easier because there's also the culture where you want virginity and tightness and inexperience, because for them, a lot of men are not able to stay. They don't have the staying power, the longevity and things like that. But for a child, it may seem impressive. And I'm saying for a child because sometimes even children will make advances towards adults. And I'm saying this to say that is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's illegal. There's
And
no
that's
way this
learned
child
behavior.
can give consent to sexual activity. And in as much as they look mature and they look developed, they are not. And they're not prepared to deal with those sort of situations.
Yeah.
But there are people who do not care. They just flatly do not care whether it is their child or somebody else's child. And there are some other things that I'd like to discuss later on, or whenever you feel like, about the facts about sexual abuse. And the reality is a lot of our children, no child is immune. Let me put it that way. No child is immune to sexual abuse or any form of abuse. No child, no person is. But
Yeah. And I think this is also where statistics are important, because a lot of global stats, a lot of research suggests that perpetrators of sexual violence are more often than not, known to the victim or the survivor. And I feel like in child sexual abuse cases, that is especially true. I think we grow up like thinking about, this stranger, this boogeyman, whatever, but oftentimes it's sexual violence in the family. Oftentimes it's sexual violence, perpetrated by an uncle who ain't really your uncle, an auntie who ain't really your auntie, an older cousin, somebody who just come to stay with your family for a little while. So, I love what you said about like no one being immune, and just as well, what you mentioned about social ineptness, maybe social unpreparedness, that plus, poverty, economic precarity, like just the context in which we're operating, that makes even so you start out with people not being immune, and then some people, because of circumstances, are even more vulnerable.
Yes.
Right? So it's like
that's what predation is about, because the facts that I want to share with us. First and foremost, no child is immune to sexual abuse, since we're just not talking about sexual abuse, because abuse transcends age, religion, gender, race, ethnicity, background, socioeconomic status, family structures. Children are at risk. Now, what are we to do? That's one fact. What are we to do? We need to be vigilant in how we care for our children and who we allow to come inside our village to take care of our children. The second one I will share is that perpetrators look for specific characteristics in the children they choose to abuse, and that is a fact. And this is coming from the assessment center, as I cited before. Once you're vulnerable, they look for a way to get in. And one of the things we need to emphasize and reiterate over and over again is that we should not be allowing people to groom our children towards these sort of things, because there are men out there who would spend a whole lot of money in taking care of the child and raise, and until they can't wait until the child gets to, and they start early grooming this child and trusting in the family. Oh, he cares and he provides. No, the best way for that man to care for is, you're concerned about my child, have a conversation with me. Pass the money to me. Talk about how we can help me. There's no need for you to have that child. Now, I remember saying it in church one day. The man who takes my child or any of my children and place in his lap will suffer. These are things that we need to look for. Why is it that you need to take somebody's child in your lap? For what purpose? I'm not saying that we should continue in the society of distrust and mistrust, but there's no justifiable reason for a child to be in somebody else's lap. We need to stop a lot of these things, and because it look cute and we touch and a tickle and no, we need to create a safe space for our children and stop allowing these things. But because we need to work, we are in a mad rush to earn, and we place our children at risk by allowing particular persons, whether they're family or not, because it could be a relative, a family member, or a family friend, to watch our children and to care for them. And we think that, oh, well, because we know them, we're this, but we don't truly know them. We don't have their history. And then some of us will know them and know that they're predators, but say, oh, no, man, we're real good. They're not going to do that to my children. But too late shall be the crime.
Well, I know recently I was doing a course from offered by the UN Women, and it's about using data collection to anti-violence against women. And one of the interesting things that I learned was that IPVR, like intimate partner violence, is actually one of the most extensively researched forms of violence. And what people don't know is that, like, we talked a lot about, you always, like, a lot of people didn't know the perpetrator often. Like, people think that it's the opposite, that it's usually a stranger, and statistics actually show that it's usually somebody you know, which is even scarier to me. Like, people don't know that it's always somebody right next to you. And I actually had read a young people review by a psychologist named Dr. Linda Papadopoulos, I think that's how you pronounce it, and she talks about what is sexualization, right? And the APA, or American Psychological Association, actually did an extensive review on the impact of sexualization on young girls, and it talked about the following definitions for sexualization as occurring when a person's value comes only from his or her sexual appeal or behavior to the exclusion of other characteristics, or a person that is held to a standard that equates physical attractiveness with being sexy, or a person is sexually objectified, that is made into a thing for others to sexually use, or rather than seen as a person with the capacity for independent action and decisive decision making. They also talked about how the APA views sexualization as a continuum. So it's not just something that it's ongoing. So it's just like we talked about grooming. So it's like sexual evaluation of some sort. So it says looking at someone with sexual intent at one end, and then severe exploitation, sexual exploitation, and such as sexual abuse or trafficking at the other end. So it's literally something that, as we talk about grooming, we look at it, go through the years of, like, somebody actually, the intent of sexualization, like sexualizing somebody's child.
That makes me think about, like, rape culture too, like, and how it starts, you know, and how it manifests, because I feel like people think that, you know, sexual violence is the start of things, but that's like, you know, there are lots of things that lead you there, right? It's the sexualization, it's the way that you talk about children, about women, about girls, about men. It's the language that they use, it's the jokes that you make, it's just the way that you perceive people and things. And I find it really interesting, because in a lot of ways, like the same, you know, older woman dancing with a child, like people don't think about what that can actually mean. Because I was watching this, you know, those people who go around doing vox pops, so they're just asking people on the street question. They had this Antiguan guy, he was asking some people, like, what's the youngest they would date? Adults. And some of them were like 13, 12, things on camera. Like date, have a sexual relationship with. And I was just like in so much shock, but also not that shocked, because like one thing that happens to, you know, like, sorry, but I think it especially happens with men, you know, when you get to be like 40s, they start to look at the girls who are 19, 18, or you're in your 50s and you're still dating a 20-year-old, and you know, like, just those gaps. But I feel like there's also, you know, that spectrum of, like, I would encounter men who knew me since I was a child, who are now like flirting with me, who are now talking to me a certain kind of way, and it's like, last year I had asked some girls, some women, I didn't get to the men, and I tried to do that earlier today, but it didn't happen, about just their experiences growing up with older men. And I want to like just take a few to just read some of the things. So this is what I asked them. I asked them, as a child, were you ever approached by an older male? Did he ever say anything inappropriate to you? Do you remember how you felt? What was that like? What did you do after? Was there anything you stopped doing or changed after the encounter? People said, and the people who responded were like, you know, 20 old to like 60 something. And all of them essentially said yes. One said, you know, there were tractor drivers who actually touched her, pinched her breasts. Somebody was 9 years old when an older man tried to kiss her. Somebody said, in terms of their response, that, you know, they had to change just how they carried themselves, because, you know, sometimes they say some girls like develop earlier, so some girls get breasts and hips and stuff before other girls, but they're still 9, you're still 10, right? And they were like, you know, you learn to cover up, you learn to conceal certain parts of your body, you learn to avoid eye contact, you learn to cross the street when you see a group of men, and it was just like things like that. And that's not to, you know, especially target men, but I feel like it's important to the conversation that we recognize that men are, just like how women are disproportionately affected in terms of experiencing violence, men are more often than not the perpetrators of violence. And that goes back to the masculinities and what's expected of men, and just how men are socialized to see other people, you know, in particular ways.
Sorry, this is where we would draw a line.
Yeah.
In the sense that there are adult males, but they're not men. And I would draw the line because, as far as I am aware, it is natural for a man to be a provider and a protector, and a man would not look at a child.
Okay.
So for the adult male who is looking in that sort of way at people's children and calling them sexy and touching them, they're not socially formed.
Okay.
They're not real men.
I agree.
I hate using the word real in front of men, because a man is supposed to be a man. And it's natural and innate, it's inherent in every man, naturally, to want to care for, provide, and protect, especially our females. And to look at someone's child, I would use what the Bible calls and say they're reprobates. They're not men. A child is supposed to feel safe in the company, because a child in the community is supposed to be my child. And every child should be considered my child. So children generally are supposed to feel safe in the company of our men, and that's supposed to be natural. Now, I might get some flack for it, but I say it without apology. I refuse to classify persons like that. They're perpetrators. They're just naturally evil.
We will call them perpetrators, but I don't necessarily want to play like semantics around, because like we also wouldn't even believe who some of these perpetrators are.
Here's the thing though. Now, I'm saying we do have a lot of perpetrators, and we have perpetrators in every discipline imaginable.
Yeah. Especially disciplines that work with children.
Yes. You have them, police, soldiers, pastors. Teachers.
Bus drivers.
There you go. Now, one of the things I want to get back to is the grooming of our children. It is not just the grooming of the children. The perpetrators groom the families as well. To accept them and to let them in. and to spend time with them and to become more trusting, as it were.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that at the end of the day, the molesters or the perpetrators have their tactic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that now we're talking about this, it makes me think about, like, as even though they're perpetrators, it makes me think about, okay, how did you get
Here.
Because then the question comes up where it's like, were you also molested when you were a child? Was this something that you felt like your innocence was taken away from you? And now that you've experienced that and you've gotten older, like I said, socially developed, that's such a traumatic experience. Some people, like, it doesn't even allow them to get to that point. I'm not making necessarily excuses for them, but it's a very difficult situation to be in. And some people who experience that, it's like, how do you, especially if it's a man and it's more prevalent with men, they're not even welcome to talk about those things. So then they go through life with that trauma, and then they feel like maybe that's okay to do because it was done to them as a child. So then it goes back to looking at the boys and really, like, validating the experiences and encouraging them to talk about it, because then it just keeps going round and round in a circle.
Yes, to talk about it, to talk with whom and to whom.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
That becomes a challenge, because even in relationships, now this is a different topic, but forgive me, even in our relationships, can or are men allowed to share their feelings? The truth is, society does not really care about men and their feelings. So it is difficult for a lot of women to listen to. They would say, oh, you need a man to talk, and yes, the man should say more. But when the man begins to talk, then the issue now becomes, why you have to bring up this? Why you have to bring up that? Or it becomes a matter that generally women feel attacked. But the issue is that men want to find peace and to express themselves. Another fun fact is, well, I'm calling it a fun fact, it is easier to treat the perpetrator than the victim.
You mentioned, and I thought that was so
insightful. It is not that we cannot break the cycle.
Yeah.
But the question is, when, let's just say the perpetrator is crying for help, because Dr. Martin, when he was here last week, said that behavior, every behavior
is attention seeking.
Yeah. So let's just say he may not come out and say that I need help with this, but the behavior displayed shows that this person obviously is going through something, whether it's a state of mental unhealthiness, mental illness, and they're different. And how do we address what this person is going through? What are the services that we need? What are the wraparound services available to not just care for the child who was molested, but for the perpetrator in and of himself? And it's easy to treat the perpetrator, but we do not go into it and deal with it. And as far as some people are concerned, that man should be killed.
Yeah.
Except,
lost him in the jail.
Except if that man is a family member.
Yeah.
Or a relative.
Or
a
somebody.
crony, or somebody that we know.
A big liar. Sorry.
I'm not going
to. Not liar. It was just an example. I don't have a specific person in mind.
Right. But I'm not saying, but even if you do, that is irrelevant. The issue is there are persons who are given a by.
Exceptions,
So, you clearly, in some matters, there's some sort of
we don't agree that this is a problem.
Right. And then even if it goes to court, persons are allowed to buy out the cases. So it becomes a matter where the child must now go and relive the trauma of the experience. And if the child does not testify, or the parents accept some money on the side for it, or the prosecutors are friend and company with some people, they will do things that will cause the miscarriage of justice. It happens.
Yeah. If you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I had a thought I lost it now.
Okay, when it comes back to you, as usual, we have 15 minutes left, and I'm like, do we need a part 3? Do we need a part 3? But just some things to, like, wrap up that conversation and then jump into the next question. I wanted to say, like, I agree with everything you say, and I feel like part of our one of the things that we're struggling with is that we are harsher with boys. So the punishment that we give to boys for talking to us, for talking too much, for being how children are, for doing things that we deem, wrong, whatever, are usually harsher than they are with girls. So, we need to recognize, parents, community, and so how we are creating menaces with how we respond to things that children do. And also, I think, you asked the question about like who talks to perpetrators and things like that, and I was actually thinking about just it's coming back to the importance of data and research, because not necessarily the causes of violence. We need to know, like, specifically what are some of the things, what brought you here, like what has been your life experience that has maybe contributed to the violence that you are perpetrating on other people. Because children who experience violence, like, that has to be stopped there. Otherwise, and it has to be responded to with like psychosocial help, some mental health services, probation, gender, like everybody. I feel like anytime like any child experiences or anybody experiences violence, like the community has to kind of wrap itself around that person to help them heal and to ensure that like they don't become part of that cycle of violence. But like I was reading this article outside earlier when I was looking up the stats that I was just looking up like different things about child sex abuse in the region, and I found a link to a study that was done on a few OECS countries, including St. Kitts, but I couldn't find the article itself. But one thing that was in like a summary of that piece was that policy in countries like ours often follows trends set in the West. Like, US, Canada, Europe, some parts of Europe and so on, where child protection systems tend to be narrow, focusing more on surveillance than on prevention, are costly to administer, and can lack cultural relevance for other societies. So some of the things that we are told to do kind of just won't necessarily work here. But especially what I focused in on was just the fact that, the focus more on surveillance than on prevention. And so I wanted to jump quickly into a conversation about gender sensitization, because that is one of the things, one of the interventions, or one of the activities that can help to prevent further violence. And I know like gender sensitization is something that you've brought up, Chanaya, so I kind of want to start there with you. Like, what about what's there to know about sensitization that can help, or how can gender sensitization help in the prevention of violence?
I think overall it would just improve the perception of how we look at individuals in general that have different, identify with different gender identities. And I actually wrote down, I wrote some notes about it. And where I said gender sensitization involves challenging traditional gender roles and stereotypes to promote equality and respect for all genders. It is also essential to educate individuals from a young age about the harmful effects of gender norms and to encourage empathy and understanding towards diverse gender identities and expressions. So I feel like it's just being able to teach people that there is no hierarchy in terms of like, oh well, I was born rich, or I was like lighter than you, or darker than you, or you was a girl that I don't know. It's just a lot of different people identity. There's so much intersectionality when we talk about gender, and how we are affected based on our background is a real thing, and people don't understand that. So I think that especially in a small community like St. Kitts, it could cause a lot of like prejudice in a way, because of like social class and background and stuff like that. And people don't really understand that there's a difference between like the majority and the minority, and how being a part of the majority, the behavior that some people could exhibit when they feel like, oh, we are part of the So I feel like it's just the empathy that's not associated with it, because they're not taught, and they're not it's not being in schools. They don't really talk about it, and I think that's where it should start in schools. Really educating the young people about accepting or showing them, well, this is from an early age how harmful the effects of gender norms could actually be on their brain, because they're still developing. Everything they learn could damage the nervous system as they get older, literally. Like everything you teach a child, they absorb everything. So you just have to be careful about what you're exposed to them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, from my end, it is not so wide or difficult. I do understand the trends that are presented worldwide, but for me, I believe that as it relates to awareness, one of the things we need to make the public aware of is the Domestic Violence Act. We need to have more conversations about it and to use the definitions outlined in different sections to talk about abuse and how abuse is meted out and how we can respond to it. The general public needs to be aware that domestic violence and gender-based violence are criminal activities. And until society gets a, we call it, user-friendly version.
Yeah.
Now, I dare say that some of our police officers themselves do not know the law.
Yeah.
So it becomes rather difficult. And we have had challenges over the years, as it were, dealing with arrest and charging persons who perpetrate domestic violence. Now, the highest form of domestic violence, and I dare say that domestic violence is really the number one thing happening in the Federation. In as much as we want to talk about it.
You don't have to dare say it.
Right. No, but here's a challenge. The challenge now is, how do we prosecute?
Yeah.
Do we prosecute in terms of a gender-based violence, a man versus a woman? Now, the difference between the gender-based violence and the domestic violence is that domestic violence is intimate partner or from the same household and things of the sort. Whether it is a visiting relationship or you live in different houses, there is some sort of intimate connection there or relation. A man going down the road and seeing a woman that looks nice, who calls to her and she ignores him and he makes an advance and things like that. What do we charge the person with when he executes some sort of gender-based violence towards? Is it a physical abuse under the Domestic Violence Act? Or do we want to use it as an offense against the person? Are we going to use it as an assault and battery here, or do we charge a person under the Domestic Violence Act? The challenge where that is concerned is that our laws need to be explained, and I think we need more programs like these to talk more about them.
Yeah.
Sad to say, there was a time in the ministry, our ministry had a program on ERE, right in ZIZ, but the cost, it was difficult to maintain the program, and we hope that one day we can get back to that. We also have challenges where not only do we do not know how to classify it, our laws are too fragmented.
Yeah.
And we need persons, who, especially the prosecutors, who are going to be more, as it were, creative in merging and finding the best suited law to charge the person under.
Yeah.
This is not the United States of America or Europe or Euro-America, let's put it that way, where they use a dart sort of method where they throw everything at you. And whatever stick. Here they want to say, let's find one. And when you say find one, if you get up from this one, then you're scot-free, because you don't have to deal with other charges that were not brought against you. So we need to be more creative as a people in terms of how we deal with prosecuting. We need to, in a sense, be more deliberate in how we teach our laws and civics and things like that. No, civics used to be taught back in the good old days. It is not taught today.
Y'all mentioned civics and
So,
I'd be like,
we come with other subjects, and you find that right now people are more teaching to the test than rather dealing with issues that are affecting us and causing the decay of society.
Yeah.
So the awareness for me need to be more focused on how we're going to do this and how we're going to present it to the public. The last thing I want to say on that is that we need to be a bit more creative in terms of how we give scholarships as well.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that it is high time, or it is better for us to give scholarship for persons to go and study psychology and psychotherapy and other things like that. We have enough medical doctors out there. Get medical doctors who are more clinical psychologists dealing with psychotherapy and things of the sort. And if the government could give more of those scholarships so that people would go in that area, it would be better for our country, because most of our people now want to do some sideway criminal justice. They're not going straight into social work.
Yeah.
We do not have real or a lot of social workers in the Federation. You know. We have the people doing social work, but they're not necessarily trained in that field.
Yeah.
So give scholarships where people can deal with those things, because no matter how you put it, our ministry is not an income generating ministry, but this is the engine of our society.
Yeah.
You're talking about people and helping families. So we need to provide services, wraparound services, alongside the stakeholders, where we can improve life for people in our society.
Yeah.
I would say scholarships, great idea, but it's the people who are able to make that happen if they think it's a great idea, and why. Because I think that's the hardest part about it, convincing them why it needs to happen. Because like you said, we're not an income generating ministry, so why would they want to invest in something like that if they feel like they won't get the return on the investment?
Yeah.
Another thing is, you mentioned how domestic violence and sexual violence is, they're criminal activities, which I agree, but it's also what other people don't understand. Understanding that it's criminal is one thing, but to understand that it happens to both men and women is the second part. Because when people hear domestic violence, they just think it happens to women.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I was just writing notes when you were talking.
That's fine.
Was that police, like you talked about how police actually don't really know. Some of them don't know the law, especially when it comes to the Domestic Violence Act. And I actually had a conversation with my director recently about a situation where, you know, like, let's say a victim would have experienced domestic violence, and they go to a police officer, and it's really required that they should take that person to the hospital if they requested it, or to a family friend or whatever, and straight up the police officer would be like, no, we're doing that. And it's up to me, somebody like me, as a program officer for domestic violence, to say, no, this is what the act says, and you are obligated to do that. So it's actually enforcing the laws being enforced. And if they're not being enforced, what are the repercussions of that? Where does it say, well, if the police officer doesn't know this, how are they being held accountable? Where do I go from there? Because I could slap the book in their face and the act and say, here, this is what the act says, but at the end of the day, like, I can't force nobody to do nothing. And then how, I don't know, I have to correct the list to me. It says pause, but it means laws. How we teach our laws. So how, I think I had an idea about like the schools, and probably seeing maybe have a discussion with my director about it, about how we could try to incorporate educating students more about DV, and like doing little pop-ups and doing like little, you know, those kind of presentations.
You have a whole gender sensitization curriculum.
But I think it would be beneficial if the Department of Gender Affairs, in collaboration with other departments, can partner and discuss the Domestic Violence Act and how it relates to not just the adults but children. And based on the fact that you have 5 major areas in domestic violence, you can use different programs and address them and give user-friendly notes to the public. The same thing could be shared on social media. There's some things that we could do. Now, as it relates to the training of the police, I know back in the days, the Department of Gender Affairs was integrally a part of the training programs. So the recruits for the police and sometimes defense force, they were taught the Domestic Violence Act, or at least there's at least one session, or sometimes we have 2, where we had discussions with them about it, because they're studying not just the Domestic Violence Act, there are other laws. So I'm not saying it to say that the focus should be solely on Domestic Violence Act. And the training program is kind of short. One of the other challenges we have is that people in the higher command or the higher level, like the commissioned officers, are persons who tend not to come to these sort of discussion because they have so many other things to do with policing. And I'm not using it to bash the police. I'm just simply saying sometimes they send persons to some of these trainings who are at lower level and they cannot effect
Right.
much
Yeah.
change to policies and how we respond
Yeah.
to some things. So it is a mammoth task, but we need to keep pushing at it and to drive the awareness. If we can get more programs, we take them. Now, in as much as it is not my thing, when I was called, I gladly jump in because it's an occasion for me to talk about what the ministry is doing and how we can help families improve how they care for each other.
I would say that's also why data is so important, because then with the domestic violence act presentations and workshops, right? Then you'd be able to, because we do pre and post assessment of the test before we teach them, and in that way you would also be able to identify the data gap in like the response, how they know what they actually learned.
Yeah.
Because you could say, well, oh well, yeah, I learned this 2 months ago, but why are they not able to retain that information, or what is the issue, what is lacking?
Yeah.
Or why can't they, why is the understanding or the fact that they were exposed to learning about this not congruent with what they do in the public or how they serve the community?
But the best way for us to know is how they live, right?
Right.
No, this is where we need to draw the line between retention and reticence. People will retain stuff, but then in a sense of trying to protect, it's not that they didn't retain it. They choose when to speak it
Yeah.
or when to address it.
Yeah.
So,
And that's where we need to introduce the empathy aspect.
Yes.
So maybe that should be something.
And the gender sensitization training should continue, and I know there is a curriculum for young people as well, which I worked on. So I know it's there. So the one for adults and the one for young people, those things need to get going. And I just wanted to say, it is 9:02, so we're wrapping up the conversation. Just to remind the Department of Gender and Department of Child Probation that Pleasure Pulse is here as a space. It might not be your own space, but we are working towards ensuring that people live pleasurable, sexual, and just total lives, right? And so if there's a time that you want to have a conversation about something, call me and we'll set it up.
and on the converse side of things, there's when you need people to come, and you can call the
I
director.
didn't hesitate.
Yes, don't hesitate to
Don't
call the
hesitate.
director
So-
and have a conversation, and I'm sure we will find someone
Yes,
to come
so
on
we
the
are
program.
working together. So Pleasure Pulse is here to create space for these kinds of conversations and conversations related to sexuality more broadly. I'm so happy again that you were all able to join me for this conversation. I think we got through more than we didn't get through this time. So I'm really grateful for your taking the time to be here and to talk to me and my listeners this evening. As usual, this was Pleasure Pulse on ZIZ Radio, YouTube, Facebook. You were listening to your host Roma Richardson and guests Troy Watson and Trinaya Douglas from Child Probation and Gender, Aging, etc. This week. And as usual, I want to remind you that Pleasure Pulse is a safe, inclusive space for everybody where no topic is too big or too small. And with that said, I will see you all next week. Have a pleasurable evening. Bye.